Some of the country's biggest news outlets now admitting their reporting on former Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani was inaccurate.
That's the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC News issuing retractions over the weekend, saying their reporting that the FBI had warned Giuliani about being targeted by a Russian influence operation was not true. All three outlets had initially reported that the information was provided by anonymous sources.
For the latest, let's bring in Newsmax national correspondent Logan Radick following this live for us from Capitol Hill. Logan, good morning.
Good morning. With those outlets retracting their reporting, there's also a development from the counselor, as you mentioned there, Sean, Alan Dershowitz, who is consulting with Rudy Giuliani on his legal advancements in this situation. He says that the raid on his home, on Giuliani's home, that is, was unconstitutional.
What the government does is they seize it all, and then they give it to some prosecutors. They call them the tank team. Those prosecutors read all the privileged information, and they decide what to turn over to the prosecution team. But the government has already read it. That's illegal.
The federal investigation is examining Giuliani's interactions with Ukrainian figures and whether he violated a federal law dealing with lobbying for foreign entities. He insists all of his activities in Ukraine were conducted on behalf of former President Donald Trump when he was leading a campaign to push the Ukrainian government for an investigation into Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden's business dealings in that country. Giuliani says he offered federal agents 3 hard drives of Hunter Biden's when they raided his apartment, but the agents refused to take them. And Giuliani says the government now has most of his personal communications.
What they did when they took all my documents from the iCloud, they admitted that there was attorney-client privileged information there. And they decided on their own what they would use and what they wouldn't use.
And the Washington Post, New York Times, and NBC are publicly retracting false reporting that the FBI warned Giuliani he was being used in order to spread Russian disinformation. And according to Giuliani's attorney, Alan Dershowitz, the only reason to seize his electronic devices is out of fear he would destroy evidence. But Dershowitz says in this case, the burden of proof falls short, adding that the FBI didn't have grounds to raid Giuliani's home.
Giuliani knew that they were after the cell phones and the computers for months and months and months, and he didn't destroy anything. So what's the basis for the search warrant rather than the subpoena? The Fourth Amendment demands a subpoena in these situations, not a search warrant. And what they did in this case was unconstitutional.
And the former New York City mayor insists he has nothing to hide.
I didn't violate a single law. I was a U.S. attorney. I was a third-ranking official in the Justice Department. Gosh almighty, I'm not perfect. But where it comes to the law, I am obsessive.
Now, the scope of this investigation is unclear, but Alan Dershowitz, who will be joining you in just a couple of moments, says that the basis for having Giuliani register as a legal foreign agent would be a weak legal defense, rather. So they're going after Giuliani, and Giuliani insists that this is because of his relationship with President Trump. Emma, back to you.
Yep, we've got more on this topic coming up right away. Logan Radick with that report. Logan, thank you.
All right, let's bring in now attorney Alan Dershowitz joining us live on the program, professor emeritus at Harvard Law School and author of this book, Guilt by Accusation, which is out. You can always grab a copy. Alan, good to see you. Just to be very, very clear, you are not an attorney of record on this, but are giving Rudy Giuliani constitutional advice. Is that correct?
Just like I would give any Democrat legal advice if they were lawyers or doctors or priests, and their information was seized and the rights of the clients or patients to privacy were being violated. This is a major civil liberties issue that involves us all. I would love your viewers just to imagine for 1 second if they had a deep, dark secret involving their family and they confided it to their priest or confided it to their psychiatrist or confided it to their cardiologist, and then they discovered that there was a search warrant for their priest. And then suddenly all the material that they gave the priest, the notes or tape recordings or whatever, are being listened to by government officials. And the government assures them, don't worry, we have a tank team. That's just some prosecutors. We're not showing them to other prosecutors. Would anybody be satisfied with that? You know, the Fourth Amendment doesn't protect you only from having information used in criminal investigation. It protects your privacy in relation to the government. The government has no right to listen to what you tell your priest, your rabbi, your psychiatrist, and that's what happened here with the lawyer's material.
And I want to go through that with you. Before I get to your thoughts in depth on what happened with Mr. Giuliani, I've got to talk about what broke over the weekend. These retractions by these major news organizations. First, NBC News wrote an earlier version of this article included an incorrect report that Rudolph Giuliani had received a defensive briefing from the FBI in 2019 warning him that he was being targeted by a Russian influence operation. That from NBC News. Secondly, Washington Post, writing this earlier version of this story, published Thursday, incorrectly reported that OAN was warned by the FBI that it was the target of Russian influence operation. That version also said that the FBI had provided a similar warning to Rudolph Giuliani, which has since been disputed. Finally here, the New York Times, the end-all be-all, wrote an earlier version of this article misstating whether Rudolph Giuliani received a formal warning from the FBI about Russian disinformation. Essentially not true. These major organizations had to make a retraction, which is a very big deal in the news world for having to go ahead and do that. What are your thoughts just overall on seeing those three make the retractions?
My point is that the media is missing the story. The story has nothing to do with the New York Times or these other media. They had a basis for reporting that. They were wrong. The question is, who is the source? The question is, who's leaking this information? The question is, if this false information is leaked to the New York Times and NBC and others, what other information is being leaked? How can we trust the prosecution's tank team? How do we know there aren't members of the prosecution that are leaking or witnesses that are working with the government who are leaking? I think the important point is now to find out who the source was who leaked this information. And remember, sources confidentiality doesn't apply when the source is fraudulently or falsely providing information. So I would think that Giuliani's legal team could subpoena and find out who the sources were that gave the false information to these newspapers and whether any government officials were involved. Look, civil libertarians, whether Democrats or Republicans, should be involved in this case. They should be concerned. The American Civil Liberties Union, the American Bar Association should all be concerned about the use of an overbroad search warrant instead of a subpoena, which enables the government to seize privileged information and listen to it and watch it. That involves all of our rights. This is not a Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative issue. This is an issue involving the constitutional rights and the privacy rights of all Americans.
Before we go, last question for you. Should a judge signed off on this search warrant? What are your thoughts on that? And then number two, the second part of that question, obviously, if you look through, Rudy Giuliani alleges that they went through his iCloud. Obviously, if you go through the former president of the United States, his attorney, you're going to see some exchanges there. How protected are those, let's say, text messages or emails with President Trump and his attorney at the time, Rudy Giuliani?
Well, they're supposed to be protected under law, but the government feels it has the right to go through them and listen to them and then decide what they're going to use or what they're not going to use. I just think that's wrong, and a judge should issue a search warrant only if there's compelling evidence that the subject of the search warrant would otherwise destroy the information. Now, Giuliani knew about this effort to try to get information for months. If he was going to destroy it, he would have destroyed it. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that he or the other lawyer who's subject to search warrant, who's also a very distinguished lawyer, would have destroyed the information. And absent that evidence, I don't believe a judge should issue a search warrant. The judge's first question should be, why not a subpoena? Remember, a subpoena is not ex parte. Both sides are involved. You go to the court, you challenge the subpoena, but a search warrant is one-sided. You just hear one side of the information, and a judge should be extremely careful in issuing search warrants instead of subpoenas.
And Victoria Tunzing's going to join us, by the way, in our 11 o'clock hour, so we'll talk to her just about that. That's Alan Dershowitz joining us live here in the program. Always great to get your thoughts, Alan. Thanks so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.